Hello! Welcome to my video series discussing a secondary world of mine and the creatures therein. Arthurome is a high fantasy setting that I have been working on for a long time. I've been eager to discuss the world, and so these videos serve as an ideal space to talk about some of the visual components of the setting that I hope you will find interesting. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the Wraiths inherent to my setting, their design, their denominations, my personal developmental process, and the role of the Wraiths within the story of the world. In traditional European folklore, Wraiths are undead creatures defined as a type of spirit known to rise shortly after death. The term Wraith isn't quite as defined in mythology in the same way that werewolves and vampires are, as it is one of several terms used generally to describe a ghostly phantom. That said, due to the unwavering popularity of ghosts in modern media, Wraiths have been more recently characterised as evil and vengeful spirits that have returned from death through sorcery or to satisfy unfinished business. This loose definition is a blessing for any kind of design work, as it really opens the door to lots of different interpretations without feeling dishonest to the nature of the creature. A difficulty I've had with previous work is trying to keep my designs true to the mythology that I'm drawing from, so that my work is distinct in its own right, while also immediately recognisable. This challenge of intent was a hurdle I had to overcome with the vampire and werewolf designs previously, but it's not something I felt would be an issue here, given the versatility of Wraiths and their limited descriptions. There are many ways to design something to feel undead, and the theme of bitter vengeance, which I feel is at the core of a Wraith from my experience, is a theme that is versatile and can be implied through many varied iterations. In today's video, I'm looking to design a Wraith that can fit within the roster of my ethereal spirits. In previous videos, I've defined ethereal spirits as a vaguely hard magic system inherent to the setting. These spirits are creatures that manifest as nature's reaction to the day-to-day actions of mortal people. There are many different types of spirits, such as werewolves, vampires, lindworms and brownies, with each adopting a form and personality to suit its task. For instance, in my brownie video, I talk about how freelance brownies manifest when a person has lost something of value to them, usually an item of importance needed in the moment when it is lost. A brownie will manifest, understanding that this is its purpose, and it will do whatever it can to meet this objective before vanishing from the world. Of course, brownies manifest in the world in tangible forms, limiting their physical abilities to what they can realistically achieve, meaning that regardless of their intentions, there is a challenge for them to overcome. The Wraiths of my setting fit this description, as they are also understood as ethereal spirits, which will manifest to complete a task before vanishing from the world. I will speak more on the nature of Wraiths as spirits shortly, but for the time being, let's look at getting into the design process. Following my typical design process, I started with some loose two-tone value silhouettes, thinking about the gesture of my Wraiths. As I mentioned before, Wraith as a term is rather nebulous, and so normally with a project like this, I might run into the issue of having too many options to consider. Thankfully, I have associations to serve as a basis. When we think about ghosts, I imagine the image that comes to mind for most people is that of a cloaked and ethereal creature with undead skeletal qualities and remnants of its time alive, be it weapons, clothing, or adornments like jewellery. Each of these is a visual component that I can introduce in my designs. As with my vampires and werewolves, these designs aren't based in a vacuum, but are informed by not only the other spirits that I've designed, but also my previous iterations on Wraiths. As an example, this was a design I produced many years ago, back when I was first getting into digital art. Now, while the drawing definitely shows its age, and carries many of my limitations from the time, it does have a distinctive look that I still find appealing. There are qualities here that I have decided to carry forward, namely the understated clothing, and the expressionless mask, and the nonsensical anatomy of the creature's distended limbs. In my newer iterations, I really wanted to give these creatures the feeling of being a poor imitation of life. They carry tangible and mundane objects like clothing, armour and weapons which are easy for the spirit to recreate, but the essence of life and the magical component of a physical being are very poorly recalled. It's like trying to remember the specifics of a dream. Your brain might visualise the important and the easy shapes, but anything else is blurred and difficult to place, a palette of something you've seen. This became the design language for my Wraiths, and at a certain point I decided to test the designs in colour and value, using study-to-concept techniques that I have used for previous designs. In this instance, I did a colour study of an orchid mantis, as I was really fond of its colours, resembling a pallid and deathly skin tone. From here, I began messing around with functions in Photoshop, treating the initial mantis study like a colour palette that I can manipulate to form a more complex thumbnail based on my initial drawings. Once I was satisfied with the general silhouette of my Wraiths, I began to introduce elements from other studies, such as the mole study from the Brownie video, using the colours and textures there as a basis for the clothing worn by my Wraiths. This process is fantastic for fast and iterative design, and it can help confirm for me if a design really works. From this point, satisfied with the direction of the design, I began working on the finished look. To clearly illustrate their nature, I decided to finalise multiple Wraith designs, with each serving different, yet similar roles, starting with the Vengeful Wraith. To understand the Wraiths of Arthrome, we must first define one of the key rules of the setting that I have thus far neglected to mention. The world of Arthrome is ruled by foundational truths known as the Unspoken Laws. These metaphysical laws are many and not well understood, with some being explicitly woven into people's nature. From a narrative perspective, they help me to distinguish my settings from others, and they have vast implications for the people dwelling on Arthrome. One example of these laws are the ethereal spirits themselves. They are creatures that manifest as nature's reactions to the actions of mortal people. Ethereal spirits can manifest anywhere across Arthrome, as they are part of a fundamental law of the world that will exist for as long as the world does. These laws are a fixture of Arthrome. They are unchanging, uncaring, and they are forever. Another such unspoken law is that of death. A common saying in the world goes as follows: "He has gone now. His soul departed to wherever it is that souls go." This is not just common verbiage, but it is the truth. It is not known, and it is impossible to know, what happens after death. When a creature dies, its soul will depart, borne hence by mysterious and unknowable forces, to somewhere far beyond reach. Creatures can return from death, as is the case of many risen undead. However, they possess no memory of where they went. As for them, no time passed since the moment they died and the instant that they are reawoken. This force is a real and powerful block, forbidding any from seeing beyond, and yet this is not considered distressing by the peoples of the world. While the fear of death is certainly a thing in Arthrome, it is not nearly as pervasive as it is in our world. Ideas of an afterlife are very rarely dreamt about, and have very rarely influenced religious practice, though faith is still very much a thing. Everyone in Arthrome knows instinctively, from the moment that they are born, that their soul will depart one day, and that they will never know where up until the day they die. Even the gods of the setting do not know, and it's this mystery that forms a very important cornerstone of the world's theology and how its civilizations have developed over the many ages. If you're at all interested in this concept, I will be discussing it further in later videos. However, for the moment, I'll be focusing on how this affects Wraiths. The most common denomination of Wraith in Arthrome is the Vengeful Wraith, an ethereal spirit classified as Pharelictum Immatrine, a word which means terror wraith, and is attributed to this creature due to its potential for violence. When a mortal creature dies, its soul departs to wherever it is that souls go. However, as the soul journeys through the lattice of creation, it can leave something behind. Like smudging charcoal across a canvas, the greater mass remains in the artist's hand, but some has been imprinted upon the page. The soul itself leaves forever, however an imprint can be left behind, and it can manifest as an ethereal spirit, depending on the circumstances. In some cases, a mortal soul may depart with unfinished business, or a want for vengeance, or a bitter grudge. These feelings are imprinted on the world, and can manifest as a vengeful wraith. These creatures will form from the murk, drawing themselves from shadow and mist into an echo of the deceased creature's visage. Their bodies are warped and nonsensical, but functional enough for the wraith's purpose, and it poses no hindrance to its abilities. Wraiths are capable enough creatures that manifest equipped with the tools required to meet their purpose. They can speak in the languages known to the soul they stem from, and they have a vague understanding of what happened during the mortal being's life, though only in the short term. That said, the Hunters Guild have come to understand that wraiths aren't truly the individual they stem from, but more like an aggrieved friend or a concerned colleague seeking to right the wrongs experienced in life. They are not the individual, and thus their want for vengeance is only as strong as the feeling of bitterness that the individual had died with. This drastically impacts a wraith's form, its abilities, and its attitude, and thus properly categorising the different kinds of wraith is near impossible for the Hunters Guild, as they vary greatly and are influenced by the lived experience of the soul they stem from. As far as the Hunters Guild are concerned, the only real way to start combating a wraith is to understand who it was that brought them into being, and what grievance they had upon death. It is known that some wraiths branch from individuals who died in precarious circumstances far from their homes, and so, should their bodies be plundered, a wraith will manifest to take back whatever dignity is left to it, as well as what was stolen. The wraith might go about this in many different ways, either by carefully sneaking into the burglar's camp and stealing back what was taken, or it might brandish its weapons and hold the thief to the sword, taking back what was stolen by force of arms. Another recorded instance involved a wraith walking headlong through the streets of Grolorn Themisreza, drawing an axe from its side and demanding a vagrant pay it back a debt that he had owed. When the vagrant refused, the Wraith, weary from travel, discarded its axe in a sulk. It then pressed chalk into its fists and began to wrestle with the vagrant until both were bloodied and bruised. A final example is the Wraith of Gaurai Galante, who came upon a smith in the southern continent of Escharos. The smith in those days had helped make terrible weapons to be used in war that had caused Gaurai intense pain for many days up until his eventual death. The Wraith wanted bloody vengeance for Gaurai. However, the smith not only repented, but invited the Wraith into his home so that they might sit and chat for a long time by the fire. The two satisfied the grudge, with the smith offering the Wraith of Gaurai to take the fingers of his dominant hand. The Wraith accepted this, knowing that the smith was right-handed, but instead it took only 2 fingers from his left hand before departing. I hope this paints a clear picture of the Wraiths of the setting. They are spirits of vengeance, however this comes in many forms, and very rarely comes above forgiveness. After all, Wraiths are more like an aggrieved friend than the actual spirit of the individual itself, and so while they seek to right past wrongs, the way they achieve this varies. They are equal parts petty and terrible, with some being murderous, while others being quick-tempered and brutish. This characterization was important for me, as it loosely fits their description in folklore and keeps to the energy of Wraiths as they are described, but also gives them a lot of character and suits the whimsy of this setting. Similarly to brownies, as I discussed in the previous video, Wraiths are very personable creatures that can experience a range of emotions to suit their purpose. From a design perspective, this characterization gives me a lot to work with, as it means each Wraith can be different from one another, rather than appearing strictly as a ghostly shade. Given that they each have different grudges, this means their personalities can vary, and opens the door for me to use different design language to suit the individual. With this design, I was very keen for the creature to appear clearly ethereal, but possess a grounded quality to its clothes, weapons and armour, so that it doesn't appear entirely hostile and without remorse. They are intimidating and ghostly, but not infallible. Of course, there is another denomination of Wraith found across Artharome, though unlike other ethereal spirits that I have discussed in previous videos, the factors that distinguish this spirit from the others are not so obvious. After the founding of the Mauroran Empire, in the wake of the collapse of the Triandane, the Hunters Guild slowly began to identify a steadily increasing number of Wraiths with a common source of vengeance drawing their ire. Most Wraiths are hot flames that burn themselves out quickly, existing little more than a handful of months. However, the quarters of the guild began to discover some moving across the open wilds that, when interviewed, expressed clearly their age. These Wraiths, known as Bewitched Wraiths, have wandered Artharome for years. More concerning is that their wanderings are not aimless, as the guild discovered a commonality. These Bewitched Wraiths were moving eastwards, finding ways to cross the steaming seas, journeying thousands of miles to the land of Albiostria. It took a long time. However, the guild was able to identify the cause of this growing demographic of long-lived Wraiths, coming to understand that they branched from the souls of sorcerers and mages, whose delvings into the arcane overcame their sense of self-preservation. Many of these scholars would find terribly powerful spells, and bewitched by the opportunity for greatness, they would cast them. They did not know until it was too late, but these pages of ancient arcanum are the workings of a first cause, willing them to be discovered. In most instances, these mages would cast the spell, and they would die, consumed by magics they were never meant to wield, eaten away in a slow and agonizing end. And in their death throes, they would be met by the face of the mad god, laughing at them as they perished. Wraiths don't appear after every death, but should it happen often enough, then the chances grow. And so the Hunters Guild would come to understand that these wraiths would manifest, journey east to find the mad god, seeking to repay him for their destruction, only to be imprisoned by him and gifted as eternal servants to Shlakava, the Lord of Liches. It is a terrible thing, and presents once again the fallible nature of the ethereal spirits, demonstrating how their manifestation can be taken advantage of, as these bewitched wraiths would never get the vengeance they seek, and so long as Shlakava keeps his concentration, then they shall never, ever depart from Artharome. The design you are seeing here is the Bewitched Wraith as it initially manifests. Once they become a servant of the Lord of Liches, their appearance changes to suit him, and so this is something I hope to visualise sometime soon. In the meantime, this design served as an opportunity to visualise another wraith that is distinct from the previous one, while keeping a lot of the important design language that makes them feel as though they are part of the same group, and that they are, in many ways, visually consistent with one another. These wraiths are dressed in mundane clothes, masking their distorted and their irregular form, which manages against itself to appear functional, able to wield implements that the wraith carried in life. That said, there are some distinct differences, namely that most bewitched wraiths carry the magical artifice they had discovered before their death, in this case, a scroll. The metal cage around their waist is also unique to these creatures, as it is the teeth of the mad god, laughing at them eternally. And so, here are the finished drawings of my wraiths. Very quickly, there are some small design notes present in these designs that I'd like to elaborate on. Firstly, a big inspiration on the design of my wraiths comes from the description of the Witch King from Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, which was hugely important and formative as a piece of fiction for my work, as I'm sure is the case for many other people interested in world building. In Return of the King, Tolkien describes the Witch King as follows. In rode the Lord of the Nazgul. A great black shape, against the fires beyond he loomed up, grown to a vast menace of despair. In rode the Lord of the Nazgul, under the archway that no enemy ever yet had passed, and all fled before his face. The Black Rider flung back his hood, and behold, he had a kingly crown, and yet upon no head visible was it set. The red fires shone between it and the mantled shoulders, vast and dark. From a mouth unseen, there came a deadly laughter. Now, while the wraiths of my setting aren't meant to be nearly as intimidating, the visual of the floating crown upon an invisible head really stung my imagination. It gives an idea to the Witch King's personality and his sense of arrogance, while also keeping the point of recognition, a face, totally hidden. Another key feature of the designs, as you'll notice, are the weapons the creatures possess. Initially, I planned to give the Bewitched Wraith a staff, however I felt this might remove the grounded and humble origins of many of these wraiths. In the case of the Vengeful Wraith, I gave it an axe because, to me, an axe is a humble weapon, versatile and commonly used, and something a Wraith might choose to wield given the nature of its task and the range of its origins. I had a huge amount of fun with these designs, and plan to do many more of them in the future. Something I noted with my developmental thumbnails is that each of them could, realistically, be its own character, as the creature's appearance is so varied and so versatile, while also possessing key notes in its design language that are very easy to carry over from Wraith to Wraith, helping to make them feel very internally consistent. As I say, this was a huge amount of fun to work on, and it was refreshing to work on something like this that, honestly, I have not touched in a very long time. Brownies, werewolves and vampires are creatures that I have drawn consistently over the years, yet in spite of how foundational Wraiths might seem, I haven't drawn one for a really long time. Anyway, that's all for my Wraith redesign for the time being. As with my previous video, I hope to come back to these designs at some point in the future to illustrate some of the named Wraith characters, and to elaborate a bit further on the very unique, petty and bizarre stories that are associated with them. That said, thank you for watching. If you have any suggestions or requests of things that you'd like me to draw, then you can leave me a note in the comments below. I've had some wonderful suggestions thus far, with some of them really grabbing my interest. I've particularly enjoyed hearing about creatures like the Kusith, the Selkie and Aswan, and hope to have a crack at designing some of these creatures pretty soon. For the moment, however, I have some designs in the work that I plan to finish soon, and that I hope you will find visually interesting. Until then, thank you, and see you in the next one.